The Sony ZV-E1 has become one of my favorite cameras that I've owned to date. And there's so many features on this little tiny, lightweight, full frame, amazing camera that I think we need to talk about how we can get the most out of this thing. So let's get right into it. First up, we're shooting S-Log3, of course. And if you've never shot log before, there's no better time to start than right now. Trust me, just shoot log. It's not that hard, it's not that scary. Do it, now, go. I'm mainly shooting in flexible ISO because most of the time I'm a run and gun shooter and I could still access my dual native ISOs, which is usually what I'm in, but if I gotta crank that ISO real quick, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Now we're gonna take advantage of the fact that you could load up to 16 custom LUTs into this camera, just like the Sony FX3 that we're shooting on right now. And you could use those LUTs for either monitoring or you could bake the look directly into your footage so you don't gotta worry about color grading later on. And all the LUTs that I load into this camera are from my favorite plugin in the entire world, which is a plugin called Cinematch, which is available for Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Premiere Pro. And it's my favorite plugin because A, it makes it super easy to match up different cameras with different colors all in the same project so everything looks the same. So if you're shooting a video and you're using, let's say, a Sony camera, a GoPro, and a DJI drone, all of those different camera companies render different colors differently. So reds on a Sony are gonna look different from reds on a DJI camera or a Canon or an Arri Alexa or Fuji, whatever. And again, obviously you want all your shots in your video to look the same. You don't want it to be noticeable that you're going from one camera to the other. The colors have to match. And Cinematch couldn't make doing that any easier. Super easy. All you have to do is select the profile for the camera that you're grading and then select the profile for the camera that you want to match it to. And if the colors for some reason don't match perfectly, you know, sometimes white balances are a little different. You might have an ND filter on your lens. Different lenses shift colors and contrast around a little bit. In a case like that, Cinematch has a whole bunch of color grading tools built directly into the plugin so that you can match everything up perfectly. And B, remember I said A before, this is reason B. Reason B is it be super easy to switch up the color signs of the camera that you're using for something else. Like me, I'm a Sony shooter, but I happen to like Canon colors just a teensy weensy bit more than I like Sony's colors. Arri Alexas too. And the process for that works exactly the same. You choose the profile for the camera that you're shooting with, and then you choose the target profile for whatever colors you want to switch it to. And here's why Cinematch is great for cameras like the ZV-E1 and the Sony FX3 and anything else that lets you load LUTs into it, because you could export those looks as LUTs. So basically you could have Canon or Arri Alexa or Fuji or Red or GoPro or iPhone colors right in your Sony camera. And like I said, you could either choose to monitor that LUT or you could bake that look into your footage and not have to deal with it afterwards. So right down at the bottom of the plugin, choose Export LUT, name your LUT, pop your SD card in there, make sure your SD card is formatted by the camera that you're using so that it can build the proper folder structure. Load the LUTs into the SD card, load the SD card right back into your camera, and then load the LUTs into your camera and you're good to go. Cinematch is fantastic, I promise you guys. And if you're interested in checking it out, they have a free trial going on right now. And if you decide to buy it after you try it, which I'm pretty sure you will because again, it's amazing, use the promo code LAPANI and you'll get 10% off your purchase. Pretty good deal. Thank you Cinematch for sponsoring today's video. Again, best plugin ever. My most used plugin of all time, by far. Thank you. All right, next up is some custom buttons because there are way too many great features that come along with this camera to not be using custom buttons. If you're not taking advantage of all the different customizable buttons on any Sony camera, then I don't know what the hell you're doing over here. One thing I'm not crazy about with the ZV-E1 is there's no dedicated mode button on the top or the back of this camera. They put it somewhere on your on-screen buttons or in your function menu, but I like to have an actual physical button on the camera that I could touch. So this little button up top here, which is the background defocus, the background blur, whatever, I don't use it. So I click that mode button, go to memory recall 1, 24 frames per second, proper shutter speed, manual white balance, S-Log3, good to go. Click it again, go over to memory recall 2, 60 frames per second. Again, everything else stays the same, so all my shots match. And memory recall 3 will be set for 120 frames per second whenever that firmware update comes out, if it's not by the time you see this video. On the back here, we have a little button with a magnifying glass, and I have that set to my clear image zoom. but it's a step zoom. So I click that and it quickly just punches right into 1.5 times crop, as opposed to using the zoom toggle to where it gradually zooms in from the widest to the tightest. Click that button, goes right to the tightest. Real fast, real quick. And then if I want to fine tune it, maybe I don't want to go all the way in, I could use my zoom toggle. This little trash can here on the bottom, I have set to when I click it, it swaps between all the different subject recognition targets, which would be humans, birds, animals, insects, cars, trains, and airplanes. Pretty sure that's it. And I really like that because if I see, let's say somebody walking their dog, I don't want to have to stop them and be like, hey, can I just hold on 1 second? Let me just set this. No, boom. I just click, 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 get it on animal, point my camera, and boom, right away it focuses on the dog. Same thing if a car is passing by, or a train, or a plane, or an insect. I'm not going to go through the whole list again. You get the idea. You get it. The back wheel here I have set to my ISO. I don't know why Sony doesn't have that automatically set. I think it's like to control your shutter speed or something like that. I always switch that over to the ISO so that when I rotate it, it just jacks my ISO up or down. Now with the ZV-E1, there are some new on-screen touch controls that we can use to adjust ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and your white balance. But for the ISO specifically, since that's the one I tend to shift around the most, I have that set to my wheel, and then boom, right with my thumb up and down, get my exposure quickly, get the shot. Also with the back wheel, if I press on the left side of it, I could turn my zebras on and off, which I use all the time to be able to set my exposure. And if I push on the right side of the wheel, I turn my focus peaking on and off for when it's time to manually focus. If I click down on the bottom of the wheel, I can scroll between all my different stabilization modes, including the new dynamic active steady shot, regular active steady shot, regular steady shot, and then completely off. And if I press on the top of the wheel, I didn't change that. It just switches between what I can see on my display, or it can give me a clean display to where I only see the settings on the outside of it and it doesn't clutter up the inside. I like that too. The only dial that the ZV-E1 has anywhere on it besides the back control wheel that we just talked about is this one right here. And I personally like to have that set to control my Kelvin. I manually white balance all the time. It's a really good habit to get into. You should try it. Don't always rely on auto white balance. It can make your color grading process afterwards so much more annoying and longer than it needs to be. Manually set your Kelvin, always have it on screen. Boom, just rotate back and forth, set it up how it needs to be set, and all your colors will look great. The new on-screen side menu on here isn't really customizable. Luckily, I use most of them, so Sony did a pretty good job on what they put on there. Now for the function menu that you could either swipe up to access or click that little function menu button, I have autofocus breathing compensation on there. Turn it on and off quickly on the fly. Next to that is my microphone levels. Next to that is my subject recognition target. Again, to the right of that, I have my settings for my autofocus transition speed. And next to that is my autofocus shift sensitivity, which both of those autofocus settings I am constantly switching all the time depending on what type of shooting situation I'm in, especially weddings. On the bottom left, I have my white balance settings. Next to that, again, my microphone settings that I have on the side menu. Next to that is my framing stabilizer, which is another new feature exclusive with the Sony ZV-E1. Again, I'm not gonna tell you all about it. You can check out the review right here. Awesome new feature. Wanna have it easy to access if I ever wanna turn it on. Next to that is my grid line display, which is another thing that I'm constantly turning on and off so that I can frame up my shot properly. And then if it's something like this where I'm on a tripod, I turn it off so I have a clean display. Next to that, I have controls for my auto framing feature, which is again, something else that's brand new with the ZV-E1. And lastly is an on-screen mode button. But again, I told you I use this one up here. But that's pretty much how Sony designed this camera, to be able to change your modes on screen. Not really a fan of it. I'll stick to the custom button up top. I am sweating. It is hot in here. Turned off my AC so you guys wouldn't hear it, and now I'm sticky and slimy. So I'm sure you noticed that I have a bunch of the same settings set in different areas of the camera. Some things are set to a button and then you'll see them again on an on-screen control. And that's because A, I didn't want to add things into these menus just to fill them up that I'm never gonna use. It's just gonna get in the way. And B, no matter where I am on this camera, I wanna be able to access those features that I use the most without having to dive into the menu. And with having everything set up the way that I do, seriously, I almost never go into the menu system on this camera or any of my Sony cameras. And once you get used to where everything you have set up is, I'm telling you, it makes everything go a lot easier, and you could flip through different modes and different settings within a second or two without even thinking about it. It's like driving a car or riding a bike. And when you're shooting something important to where every single second matters, or else you might miss an important shot, having your camera fully customized and knowing exactly where everything is without even having to think about it makes a huge difference in your workflow. I promise you. Let me know down below, do you have any of your buttons set up differently than I do? Lay out the list. Maybe I'll see something there and I might want to swap it over. I got no problem switching up for something that's better. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you throw me a sub. I appreciate it highly. Throw me a thumbs up, click that little bell. Thank you, CineMatch, for sponsoring today's video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Yeah!